When you took your DNA test on 23andMe, did you find out that you had Neanderthal ancestry? If you did, let me tell you how contracting COVID may be a concern for you. A split between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapiens happened around 550,000 years ago. And Neanderthals died out around 40,000 years ago. But only they hadn't disappeared entirely from the earth, as interbreeding, oh god, I really hate this word. Like, it sounds like incest to me. Or, I mean, I know that it sounds scientific and all, like no emotions, no lovemaking required, but that word is like moist to the majority of the population that hears moist. Moist. But anyway, back to the educational video. Interbreeding between the two groups around 50,000 years ago produced viable offspring. So much of Neanderthal DNA lives within modern human beings, except for those who live in sub-Saharan Africa that do not have any Eurasian ancestry, as Neanderthals left Africa some 600,000 years ago. A lot of these genes that had gotten passed down to us from them have attributed to things like lipid metabolism and hairiness. Unfortunately, much of them have been associated with much more of the severe side of diseases that affect the immune system, which may increase the risk of developing lupus, cirrhosis, Crohn's disease, type 2 diabetes, and yes, even severe COVID. But according to research that focuses on studies on Neanderthal DNA led by Hugo Zeyberg and Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, scientists say that two long sections of DNA that are inherited from Neanderthals can determine whether you have a resistance or a susceptibility to severe COVID. Of course, depending on which is present. And quick aside, I remember when I was little and Neanderthals were just brutish cavemen that carried bats to hit their women upside their heads to knock them out and rape them. And as soon as scientists found out that they too have this brutish DNA, they changed the narrative real quick. And by scientists, I mean some scientists, not all the scientists. I see you, Africa. Now Neanderthals come out speaking English in tuxedos, doing kung fu, and have feelings and stuff. Like, this is crazy. Their first paper that they published in Nature in September of 2020 described one Neanderthal DNA strain, also known as a haplotype. And for those who do not know what a haplotype is, I got you. A haplotype is a group of genes within an organism that was inherited together from a single parent. So this haplotype is associated with a higher risk of serious illness. Having just one copy of the haplotype doubles the risk of symptoms like trouble breathing, persistent pain and pressure in the chest, new confusion, the inability to be awakened or to stay awake, bluish lips, or kind of a bluish tint to the face. So if both of your parents have this haplotype, then you possess two copies, which increases your risk substantially, more than 50%. However, just because the majority of the world has Neanderthal DNA and genetics does not mean that this haplotype is evenly distributed around the world. So for example, unsurprisingly, in sub-Saharan Africa, it is virtually absent except for those who have Eurasian descent. However, surprisingly, even though COVID was discovered in Wuhan, China, it is very, very rare that East Asians have this genetic sequence, while 16% of Europeans do. But the population where this sequence is the most common is in South Asia, and to be even more specific, Bangladesh, where 63% of the population have this gene sequence. So there's still research being done on what exactly this haplotype does. But scientists could say that one gene encodes a protein that interacts with the cell receptors that SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19, uses to enter cells and then hijacks them. The haplotype is also thought to be involved in the production of signaling proteins called cytokines that help to regulate the immune system. This sort of gives off an overly aggressive autoimmune response, which is one of the mechanisms by which COVID does kill. So let us break it down in layman's terms a little bit further. When the body first encounters a virus or a bacteria, the immune system gathers to begin fighting the invader. The little foot soldiers in these battles are molecules called cytokines that set off flares and signals to the cells to assemble a response. Usually, the stronger their immune response, the stronger the chances are of vanquishing any infection, whether they be bacterial or viral. But as much as 15% of people battling any serious infection, the immune system continues on their war path long after the virus is no longer a threat. They're just pillaging, raiding, and it continues to release cytokines that exhaust the body by keeping it on full alert in order to keep the body safe. But because they are misguided, these cytokines go on an attack, and they start to attack multiple organs like lungs and your liver that may eventually lead to death. So I just want to give a shout out to Apurva Mandavili if she is watching this. She is an American investigative journalist in medical science for the NYT that actually breaks down this like an adventure fantasy novel. Like I felt like I was listening to an audiobook for Return of the King, Lord of the Rings saga or trilogy, whatever. On the other hand, some of those cytokines actually protect against very dangerous diseases like cholera, which leads researchers to speculate that may be the reason why this haplotype is common in Bangladesh and India, where cholera has been a problem for centuries. Because of the frequency differences between South Asia and East Asia, Dr. Pabo surmises that these differences are caused by evolution, which is removing the haplotypes in some populations where it's not being used and increasing them in populations that it is being used. So a second study published in 2020 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences expressed concerns about another Neanderthal haplotype. That unlike the other haplotype that we were just discussing found on the third of the 46 chromosome, this new one is found on chromosome 12. So scientists have a better understanding of what this does because prior to connecting it to Neanderthal origins, it was already being studied. Its effects seem to be more protective, yet less potent by restricting the spread of RNA viruses like corona. By directing infected cells to self-destruct quickly, decreases severe COVID by 22%. This also provides some protection against West Nile virus, hepatitis C, SARS-CoV-1, which was very infamous back in 2002. It was the infamous SARS outbreak. Between 25% and 35% of the population of Eurasia carries at least one single copy, with Vietnam and Eastern China leading this, with more than half of the population being counted as carriers. It also exists at a much lower rate among Black Americans, who have more recent Eurasian ancestry as well. I'm gonna let it sit. You know what I mean. So this research may explain as to why some countries may be hit harder by more severe cases of COVID than others. In the UK, people of Bengali descent suffer severe COVID-19 at twice the rate of the general population. But exacting this information can be very difficult because age, obesity, sex, and health history all influence the severity of COVID. Also, comparing stats between countries are complicated due to the difficulty in counts, especially in poor countries. Despite the prevalence of this harmful haplotype, the official COVID-19 death rate in Bangladesh is just 5 out of every 100,000 people. And this is an order of magnitude lower than countries where this haplotype is much rarer. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, How is this important to me? I'm African. This just goes to show that genetics matters. And COVID may be an endemic disease. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is an endemic disease? An endemic disease is regularly found among particular people in a certain area. So, chickenpox is endemic. Polio was once endemic. The cold is endemic. So if this happens, doctors will be able to evaluate which patients are likely to be vulnerable and which patients are likely to be resistant to COVID and act accordingly if they are not affected by politics. So this can be good. So history, like we always say, repeats itself over and over again. It's a cycle. And if we are going by that cycle, this suggests that COVID-19 is unlikely to be the last novel coronavirus, RNA virus, to make the jump from animals to humans. So if populations are likely to be more vulnerable than others, isn't that worth knowing for the next time that this happens? Because it will. Please close the door on that like button. Put some oil on that subscribe button. Massage that share button. If you're into videos that take care of your mind, body, heart, and soul. Slick poet, because that actually rhymed. That was off the dome. Like, I feel like a rap battle.